Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm WWII and in today's video I'm going to be reviewing the brand new Tier 8 Premium German medium tank, the Kampfpanzer 07RH. So this is a medium tank really only by name. It's more of a hybrid medium / light tank due to the fact that it has pretty nice mobility, great concealment, some nice view range. However, it does suffer from some of its firepower elements, and I'll tell you what they are in just a little bit. It does have the best DPM that is possible on any premium tier 8 medium tank. However, it can be quite hard to use that DPM, and I'll tell you why in today's video. We're going to have a look at the stats of the Kampfpanzer 07RH here in Excel compared to 3 other premium tier 8 medium tanks. We'll have a look at the DPM and where it stacks up compared to the other tier 8 premium medium tanks. Then we're going to have a look at the armour profile of the Kampfpanzer 07RH over on tanks.gg, because there are a couple things you should know. And then we're going to have a look at my equipment and commander setup, how that affects the stats of this tank. Then we're going to get stuck into 3 gameplays to finish off today's video to show you how this thing performs on the battlefield. But here is the tank and the artwork that Wargaming have put up on their article about this tank on the website. As you can see, it's a fairly chunky light tank or a small medium tank depending on how you play and how you view this vehicle. It has a rounded turret which is very large indeed, and it doesn't have any armor on the turret at all, so when you're using your 9 degrees of gun depression you will just get penetrated from the front, and even against some HESH rounds and very high penetration HE rounds. In terms of the price of this vehicle, if you wanted to pick this thing up, you can get it from yesterday as I'm recording today's video, which was the 21st of March, and you can get it until the 18th of April. You have 3 options available to you. The primed bundle, which has equipment, premium time and boosters for 13,300 gold. The fully loaded bundle, which comes with premium time and boosters for 11,100 gold. And my favourite, the tank on its own, the base bundle for 8,600 gold, which is a fairly decent price for a brand new tier 8 premium tank, and it'll probably go down in the future and be in sales, but if you wanted to get this thing now, it's a relatively reasonable price. Here's the artwork that Wargaming have put up. You can see it does have a very large lower plate, and that doesn't have any armor at all, so you're going to have to try and play more like a scout, more like a light tank than a medium tank, and support your medium and heavies from a distance using your great mobility, concealment and your view range. So now we're going to head over to Excel, have a look at the stats of the Kampfpanzer 07RH here on the left. In this comparison, we're going to be comparing to the STA2, the K91-2 and the Panther 88. Why have I chosen those tanks to compare to the Kampfpanzer? They're similar in terms of their DPM. In terms of the K91-2 and STA2, they're similar in terms of their concealment values, and it'll give you a good indication of how the Kampfpanzer stacks up. Bear in mind for this comparison, the Panther 88 has preferential matchmaking, meaning it doesn't see tier 10 vehicles, which is why some of the stats will differ from the other 3 in this comparison. If you haven't seen my tank comparisons before, red is the worst stat in the comparison, green's the best, orange is somewhere in between, and the ones highlighted in yellow are with my commander and equipment setup applied, and I'll talk you through how I got to these figures a little bit later on. So we're going to start with the XP, commander XP and the silver bonus of all of these tanks, then we're going to get stuck into the raw stats of the vehicles. So the Kampfpanzer 07RH has a 10% XP bonus, it doesn't have a commander XP bonus, and it has a 50% silver bonus. In terms of the XP bonus, it's the joint worst in this comparison, but only by 5%. None of these vehicles have a commander XP bonus, and they all have the same 50% silver bonus. It can be difficult to make a lot of silver with this tank because of the very poor penetration on the standard rounds, so if you're going to be getting a premium medium tank just to be making silver, this one might not be for you unless you really love it and it suits your playstyle down to a T. Next, we're going to have a look at the hit points, the view range and still concealment of these vehicles. So as you can see, the Kampfpanzer has 1350 hit points, the joint worst in this comparison with the K91-2, and it does fall behind the STA-2 and Panther 88 by some way. That means that due to the fact you don't have any armor as well, you do have to use your concealment, use different positions on the map to try and fire from bush locations and try not to get spotted, because you will lose your hit points very quickly. If you're fighting against tanks that have high caliber guns, you are only a sort of 2-shot to a 3-shot, and of course you see tier 10s which can obliterate you in one shot, like the Centurion AVRE, so yeah, definitely watch out for that. It does however have very nice view range at 390 meters, which is the joint best in this comparison with the Panther 88. That allows you to boost your view range to a very, very nice level to allow you to spot for yourself and outspot other medium tanks, whereas you might struggle in some of the larger medium tanks to outspot them. In terms of the equipment, you could choose to forego the advanced optics and maybe go for something like vents to improve your DPM even more. And if you use situational awareness and you use combat rations, you'll still have a pretty decent view range. So that's a nice plus for this tank, and it does allow it to play a very nice scouting role. Next, the still concealment ratings of these vehicles. As you can see, the Kampfpanzer 07 IRH has 345 meters still concealment, which for its fairly chunky size for a light tank or a small medium tank is a pretty good figure. It's only slightly worse than the K91-2, which is the best in this comparison, and it is better than the STA-2 and miles better than the large Panther 88, and you can get that down to a very nice level. As you can see, mine is down to 282 meters still concealment, meaning I am able to outspot many of the opponents on the battlefield, and I'll tell you how I got to that in just a little bit. So that's another good plus point for this tank. Next, we're going to have a look at the mobility, and it's pretty good news. As you can see, a lot of it is highlighted in green. It has a 700 horsepower engine, 23.33 power to weight, 65 kilometers an hour top forward speed, 25 kilometers an hour reverse speed, and the hull and turret reverse are 55 degrees and 50 degrees a second respectively. So as you can see, apart from the engine power which goes to the K91-2, the Kampfpanzer 07 RH has the best in all of the other stats. It blows these other tanks out of the way in terms of its power to weight, and it does have the best top forward speed by 10 kilometers an hour, 25 kilometers an hour, very nice to get down off of ridge lines, and your traverse speeds mean you are able to get around opponents very easily indeed. Like slow lumbering heavies, you can out traverse them very nicely, and if someone tries to get around you, you can swing your gun and your hull around and get your shots on your enemy. So that's very good news, and as you can see, those traverse speeds are miles better than any other medium tank in this comparison. So once you do get up to your top speed, you are very nimble and able to evade fire. One thing to mention is that it does have very bad soft terrain resistances, meaning that if you are on sandy maps or a map like Swamp, then you will be relatively sluggish compared to other fast tanks, so definitely watch out for that. Next, we're going to have a look at the gun of the Kampfpanzer 07 RH, and it is a 90mm gun. And as you can see, 200 alpha damage on your standard AP rounds and your premium heat rounds, the lowest in this comparison. Very, very low indeed. You are not going to be out trading many tanks at all. In terms of the HE rounds, your damage goes up to 320, which can come in useful as it does have very nice penetration, but those alpha damages are very low, and it's made up for slightly in the gun handling and DPM, but definitely watch out for that. You do have to make use of these 200 alpha damage. You have to expose yourself time and time again to try and get multiple shots for every one shot that an enemy gets into you. So as we have just said, it fires AP and heat as its premium ammunition choices and HE as its third ammunition selection. In terms of the speed on these rounds, 962 meters a second, I should say, for the AP rounds isn't brilliant. It can struggle a little bit at long ranges, but at mid to short ranges, the lead feels pretty good. You just have to get used to firing at long ranges, and with the poor penetration, you will struggle to penetrate at long range. In terms of the heat rounds, 870 meters a second, slower than the AP rounds, but you do retain all of your penetration over distance, and 853 meters a second shell velocity on your HE rounds. Pretty decent for HE rounds, and with very nice penetration you can make them work. In terms of the penetration itself, it's 205mm of penetration at tier rate on your standard AP rounds. That's extremely poor. It's the worst in this comparison apart from the Panther 88, but that doesn't see tier 10 vehicles. In terms of the premium heat rounds, 255mm of penetration. Again, it's better than the Panther 88, but it sees tier 10 and it's miles off the STA2 and the K91-2. The K91-2 in particular has 290mm of heat penetration, which can contest the front of heavy tanks at tier 10, whereas the Kampfpanzer 07RH does rely on its concealment and its mobility to flank enemies, and you definitely have to go for weak spots with this poor penetration. The one good point about the stats we're looking at now is the HE penetration. It's the best in this comparison by some way, and that will boost your alpha damage to 320. Very useful for artillery and lightly armoured tanks, so definitely make the most out of that. In terms of the gun handling, as you can see, it's pretty good news for this tank. The best aim time in this comparison at 1.7 seconds. You don't really have to invest in anything to get that down. In particular, you can focus on other things like the DPM. In terms of the accuracy, 0.35, it isn't the best. That goes to the Panther 88, but it is better than the STA2 and the same as the K91-2. And with the crew skills now, or commander skills we have in the game, you can get that down to a very nice level. In terms of the DPM, it's 2,308. This is the best DPM you can get on any tier 8 premium medium tank, and I'll show you in just a second where it fits in terms of all the other tanks. In this comparison, it is the best by some way, meaning that you have to make use of this DPM, especially if something with a higher caliber is trading with you. You want to get multiple shots for every one shot they are getting into you. So with that DPM, it means that you reload for one shot in 5.2 seconds base, and I've got mine down to 3.79 seconds. Your ammo capacity is 80 rounds due to the fact you have such a good rate of fire and such a low alpha damage. In terms of your gun depression, 9 degrees. I wish it did have the 10 degrees that the STA2 has, but it is better than the Panther 88 and K91-2, and it can be useful on most of the ridgelines in the game. And lastly, 15 degrees of gun elevation. Not as good as the K91-2's 20, but it is better than the other two tanks in this comparison, the STA2 and the Panther 88. So that's it for the stats of the Kampfpanzer 07RH. We're going to have a quick look at the armour profile, then we're going to discuss the equipment and commander setup, how that affects the stats, and then we will get stuck into the gameplay at the end. So we're going to head over and have a look at the armour of the Kampfpanzer 07RH here on tanks.gg to show you how this thing holds up. So from the front, as you can see, the lower plate is very large indeed. It's only 115mm thick and it's slightly sloped, but from the front you only need 158mm of penetration to go through reliably. The upper plate is 115mm of armour as well, and from the front, as it is sloped back quite a way, you need approximately 205mm of penetration to go through the upper hole. And in terms of the front of the turret, it's 80mm thick and is 75 towards the outer edges. You can go through this with 80 to 90mm of penetration, and even some HESH and high penetration HE rounds will go through the front of this turret, so not very useful at all. Doesn't have a weak point on top, but who really needs it when the turret is that weak? One thing to know is that if you do angle it, kind of a 40 to 45 degree angle, you can get your lower plate to a fairly thick level at 220mm of penetration needed to go through, and the upper plate can be got to a level where you need 240mm of penetration to go through, so it's always worth angling. And of course, if you do over angle, you're going to be creating auto ricochet angles on the front of this hull, and when you are moving zigzagging, it can occasionally bounce the occasional round. In terms of the side armour, it's 75mm thick, which is really good news because it means it can side scrape. As you can see, it's an auto ricochet angle at this angle, but as soon as you start to over angle, the front of the side of the tank becomes an easy penetration at 159 to 160mm of penetration needed to go through. And due to the fact that this turret is rounded all the way around, it's extremely weak. 60mm of armour on the sides of the turret, meaning that it's going to be a very easy penetration for pretty much everyone. The back of the turret is 60mm and the back of the hull is only 25mm, so it's a very lightly armoured tank that can occasionally bounce rounds off of the upper plate if it's angled, and to the outer edges of the turret if you are shooting it from the front. Of course, don't shoot there, shoot more towards the gun and you will go through. In terms of the gun depression, you have 9 degrees over the front there, as you can see, and only 7 degrees over the back, so definitely watch out for that. When it's using its gun depression, if it's covering its lower plate, which is very hard to do because it's so big, your upper plate goes to about 248 to 250mm of penetration needed to go through, but that turret is so big and it's so easy to go through, still only need 80 to 100mm to go through the front of that tank, and you're going to be seeing tanks up to tier 10, so yeah, it can become extremely frustrating in that regard in terms of the armour. But that's all you need to know about this tank. Let's have a look at my equipment and commander setup and how it affects the stats of the Kampfpanzer 07H. So in terms of equipment, I run advanced optics, advanced concealment and advanced loader. And in terms of my commander skills, I run sixth sense, born leader, rapid loading, steady aim, snapshot, run and gun, camouflage expertise, silent driving and situational awareness. So in terms of my equipment, I'm trying to boost my view range and my concealment to be able to outspot my opponents, and the loader to improve the already very nice and best in class DPM. In terms of the commander skill, sixth sense and born leader is standard, I run on every commander. Rapid loading to help the already best in class DPM. Then you've got steady aim, snapshot and run and gun to help the gun handling skills out, and this will also improve your turret traverse. And lastly, I've got 2 concealment perks in the form of camouflage expertise and silent driving to try and be as stealthy as possible when I'm on the move, and overall with camouflage expertise and situational awareness to boost my view range even more to become a very efficient scout. And if you run that same setup, you'll be looking at a view range of 499 meters like I have, and that's combined with a still concealment rating of 282 meters, so very useful indeed, and very useful if you want to play a scout role, and this tank does that very nicely. In terms of the mobility, the only thing that's changed with my setup is the turret traverse due to the gun handling skills. It's gone from 50 to 54.3 degrees a second, so I nearly have that 55 degrees a second on the turret as well, meaning it's very nimble in that regard. And lastly, in terms of the gun handling and DPM, my aim time's dropped to 1.57 seconds, very nice indeed. That pretty poor accuracy of 0.35 has gone to 0.28, so now it is pinpoint accurate. The DPM has gone up to 3,164, which means I now reload for 200 alpha damage or 320 with the HE in 3.79 seconds, and I found that this setup's really good. Of course, I recommend this one, but you can tweak anything out for your own kind of play style, but I think this is a good place to start in regards to the Kampfpanzer 07RH. So that's it for the stats of this tank. Very good mobility, very nice concealment and view range. Gun handling and DPM, very nice with the DPM being best in class. It does suffer in terms of its alpha damage and poor penetration on standard and premium rounds. Best HE penetration and the speeds on the rounds or the shell velocity. You do have to get used to the lead, but after a while it isn't the worst it could be, and it's definitely not as bad as some tanks that have AP rounds. So in terms of the gameplay then, we're now going to get stuck into the first of 3 games to try and show you how this thing performs on the battlefield. So I'll see you in the first gameplay shortly. So we're now into the first gameplay of today's video, and we are here on Swamp, which is the first time I will have featured this map on my channel, as obviously it has just came back into the game and into rotation. And it's good that this map has come up first in today's review, because it does show you that this tank, although it does have good top forward and reverse speeds, good power to weight, it does suffer on soft terrain maps a little bit in terms of its mobility, depending on whether you go into swampy areas or the sort of more medium terrain that we are on here. So I hope that you're getting a nice indication of the mobility of this vehicle as we start today's 3 gameplays. We're going to head here into the sort of northern section of the map, hug this rock, and we're using the great view range that we have now got on this tank of 1 meter under 500 meters view range to outspot tanks crossing the 0 line into position. We're going to try and get some shots into these tanks that are crossing, but as you can see, we do struggle to penetrate that Alpine Tiger, which is a tier 8 premium heavy tank. However, we do get some spotting assistance, and hopefully we're going to manage to get a shot through the side. We low roll, but we set him on fire, taking out the Alpine Tiger and getting our first kill of today's video and getting 288 assistance. So you can see the rate of fire is very nice. You do have to expose yourself quite often in order to be able to rack up the damage in this tank, but with the great concealment we didn't get spotted there when we fired at that Krauss-Panzer, and we managed to get 1 shot into him and he was taken out. And we're going to move forward using the mobility of this tank, going from position to position here on Swamp, trying to circle around the north and then head down the 9-0 line and spot out towards their base. Going to fire on the move because we got run and gun, but I'm just going to wiggle around, try and evade fire, and hopefully we're going to get some view range out on the tanks in the middle. We're getting some assistance, which is always very nice, and we're just waiting now for this STA2 to hopefully come round again, and hopefully we can go through his turret from this distance. But yeah, I'm playing this tank like a scout tank. I'm playing like a very large light tank that has incredible DPM, and it is better suited to large open maps that have bushes and lots of foliage for you to hide this tank in. Things like Westfield are really good, Thiepval Ridge. You're going to be able to hide in bushes and outspot opponents from mid to long ranges, and you'll be able to sit there and fire over and over again without getting spotted if you choose to focus on the concealment of this tank when you're thinking of your equipment and your commander setup. You are able to outspot pretty much any other medium tank, bar maybe the Barask and things like the K91 too, but anything else at tier 8 you should be able to outspot. Any other heavy tanks with this setup you should be able to outspot, and yeah, it can be a very effective scout indeed. We managed to bounce a shot there from that SU as he was looking up into our upper plate. I think it just ricocheted off, showing you that the upper plate can occasionally give you the miracle bounce, but I was definitely prepared to take a shot there as we try to take out that tank, and then we're going to push round and hopefully spot out tanks towards their capture circle. Now we're using this ridgeline, which is kind of the extent of our 9 degrees of gun depression. Here I'd like to have 10 degrees, so we're going to have to try and find a slightly better angle to expose as little of our turret as possible, because remember, it only has really low 80mm of armour on the front of the turret, meaning that anything will go directly through you. Now we're just waiting for the weakest parts of the enemies to expose themselves to us, so like the side of the turret, the rear of tanks. We are going to struggle to go through the front of heavy tanks, even at tier sort of 7 and 8, and especially against tier 9 and tier 10 heavy tanks. However, we are able to be a distraction, spot them out, go for the tracks, and get shots in where we are able to. Sometimes if you are confident and maybe you are in a decent matchup like we are here with a lot of tier 8 tanks and even some tier 7 tanks, we're able to be a little bit more cheeky, pop up over and over again, make sure we're looking at where the enemies are looking with their turret, and then we're able to pop up and get shot after shot into the opponents. Always going for the tracks with this kind of gun, because although it's a lower caliber and it might take a couple of shots, once you've got them tracked, you are able to keep the opponents tracked very easily indeed with this rate of fire. I've got mine down, like I say, to around 3.8 seconds per shot, but you can improve on that if you so wanted by using ventilation instead of something like the concealment or the optics when you're choosing your equipment setup. Now on Swamp, we have managed to effectively win this one by circling round towards their base. We are capturing the base. There's 2 tanks left. We're going to go for this FE4 202P, and we're going to use the rest of our hit points to do a little nudge, get some ramming damage, and finish off with a kill on the FV4 202P in a very decent game for the Kampfpanzer 07RH. We finish in second place on our team with a profit of 98,000 silver. That's only a second class, showing you obviously the best players are already playing this tank very, very well indeed. We get 3 kills, 3k direct damage, 1.3k assistance, and we had that miracle block bounce off the SU 101, I believe it was. So that's it for the first game. A very standard game I was having in this tank. Very, very nice for pushing the tempo, being the aggressive scout, using your concealment, and trying to put your DPM to work. Now let's head on into the second gameplay. So you're joining me 30 seconds into this battle here on Westfield, which is one of the best maps for a tank like this, with fantastic view range and great concealment. We have spawned in the south western corner of the map, and we're just going to head to the center, use all of these bushes, try and extend some view range out towards the 9-0 lines where the tanks are crossing, and hopefully we're able to get some nice juicy assistance to start off this battle. As you can see from this kind of distance, we're able to fire without getting spotted, which is just testament to the fantastic concealment this vehicle has. You do have to be a little bit careful with a tank like this that has such a great rate of fire. People will be able to see your shell tracers, and if you're continuously firing at someone and they're looking at you, they should be able to deduce, if I can get the word out, where you are, and it can be worthwhile moving between every shot occasionally just so you don't get blind fired. We're now spotted that Orochi, I believe, crossing the open ground. We're going to try and get some nice side shots into this tier 8 premium Japanese heavy tank. We do finally get spotted as there is a medium tank in F6, so we're going to use the great mobility, and going downhill on Westfield, it's not going to be an issue for us to get out of the way, although I handbrake turn a little bit too much there, slowing my momentum, which means that I do take fire from towards the bridge over there on Westfield. Now we're going to stop and try and keep this 87 tracked. Unfortunately, we don't get a tracking shot, but we do manage to penetrate that 87 there, which means that we're now up to 1.2k direct damage. And it's all about rinsing and repeating this spotting game. We're using our great view range to get spots off, pulling behind these bushes, trying to get as many shots on tanks that are unsuspecting or who are otherwise engaged, and playing as a support tank. You definitely don't want to get into a situation where you are going 1-for-1 with a tank with higher alpha damage and you're not able to put multiple shots for everyone they're putting into you. You want to try and get as much out of this gun as possible, because that alpha damage is very low, and when you roll low, especially like for 150 or slightly higher, it can feel quite annoying because you feel like you're getting nowhere with your game. However, you just got to keep at it, and hopefully by the end of the battle you should be able to get a decent damage result. Now on Westfield, we're just trying to take out this Batchat because it's one of the only tanks that's going to be capable of spotting me, and also outspotting me, I should say, if they have their light tank set up correctly. So once the light tank's out, we're able to use our concealment and our view range to push this battle forwards, and hopefully we're going to have a nice combined damage game. One of the things you can do in a good matchup like this is to get rid of the enemy light tanks first. If you are able, use your fantastic DPM to take them out, then the rest of the battle you have free reign for your vision, for your team, and hopefully that all will correlate into some nice victories. However, on Westfield it can be sometimes a little bit slow to start off with. We're getting targeted by an artillery, so we do a little bit of a zigzag and a loop, try and throw him off the scent, and now we're going to go a little bit higher, try and extend our view range out some more, and then hopefully we can pincer the enemies into that sort of northeasterly corner. Now we're going to just try and get our 90mm gun to fire as best as possible on this Black Prince. We had one into him, now we're getting another one, and you can see when you do eventually get your gun singing, you do pick up some nice damage. A little bit of a bug there as the gun bucked up on that building, which was a bug from ages ago. Either that or I was just terribly aiming for the sky. Now we're firing an SU-130 PM, which of course won't be an issue for any kind of penetration as it has no armour. We've been fortunate in these first couple of games to be in top tier matchmaking where our penetration won't be as much of a hindrance, but in tier 10 matchups the only difference is that I'm slightly more cautious with pushing forward, and you do have to be careful and keep an eye on the minimap for tanks that have very high alpha damage guns like the Death Star, FV4005, the Centurion, AVRE or any tier 10 tank destroyer. Apart from that, you play a similar role, you try and scout for your team, assisting your light tanks in the scouting business, and you're supporting your medium and heavy tanks with your tank from mid to long ranges. I carry plenty of heat rounds, as you can see, because it does have such poor penetration on your standard rounds, and it won't make you much silver if you play it like this. However, this isn't a tank that I would recommend going if you're just looking for a silver maker. There's definitely much better tanks out there at tier 8 that are much more competitive for the majority of the player base and that have nice standard penetration. So now here on Westfield, we've managed to pincer these enemies right into the northern corner. We're going to fly over the ridgeline. I tried to get a fancy little ram and a shot there, but it means that we are able to spin around, get one more shot in on that Barask, and that's the end of this game here on Westfield. A nice sort of 6-minute battle there where we finish in the MVP slot with 2 kills, 3.1k direct damage, another second class with 2k assistance, 1715 basic speed with 121,000 silver profit with a premium account, 70,000 silver profit without, and yeah, a very standard game that I was having in my session with the Kampfpanzer 07RH. I really like playing that vision game. I've gotten used to playing light tanks over the years of playing World of Tanks console, so it does feel very comfortable. Once you do get the hang of setting it up correctly and using the concealment and view range, you should go pretty far with this tank. So now we're going to head on into the third and final battle to see how we do in that one. We're now on Westfield, and again we're 30 seconds into the battle. We have spawned in the northeastern corner, and we've come here to E9 to get some view range out towards the south at tanks that are heading in towards the town and in towards that sniping position which is directly in front of us now. Try and play this a little bit cautiously at the start, as obviously we are the furthest one forward in this position anyway, and we should be able to outspot a lot of tanks here and get some nice assistance and also some nice side shots as the enemy are advancing into position. There is an artillery on the enemy team, so we do have to be careful about getting spotted and getting crapped on by the artillery, because as the armour profile of this tank would suggest, you will not take kindly to artillery shells at all, especially when they're going on to the thinnest part of your armour. So we've already got 802 damage and 673 assistance at the start of this battle. We're just playing cautiously, trying to get the view range out, and even though there are some tanks in front of us, there are some heavy tanks, it looks like we're getting the majority of the spotting here due to the fact that we have pushed our view range close to 500 meters. We're rarely getting spotted unless we go too close, and that's user error. That's not the tank's fault. I should have sat back a little bit more before I fired, but I feel very comfortable with the mobility. You're able to get out of harm's way once you are spotted very easily with this tank. Very nice reverse speed, very good top forward speed, and now we're going to try and see if we're able to penetrate this oh-ho. We're not going to go through with the standard rounds, so we switch to the heat rounds, and it's just good enough to go through this tier 8 Japanese super heavy tank. And we're now up to 1500 damage, and it's just about whittling away down your opponents. We're shooting at tanks like this oh-ho that are trying to get into a position, get out of harm's way. They're distracted by maybe artillery and the tanks that are already in the town. We are causing a distraction ourselves by spotting the enemies, but we're also trying to make the most of distractions and get as many rounds into the enemy before we get detected or before we start to take fire as possible. And that's how you play this tank. It's definitely not a tank for a brand new player to this game, I would say. You can learn to play a scout role very nicely in this tank if you wanted to. However, there are more competitive vehicles for that kind of role, something like a Barrasque, which is the tier 8 French premium medium tank, which can be very good at scouting role as well. And now we're just using this area here to try and get side shots into the tanks that are trying to make their way towards our base. Unfortunately, we do get spotted by someone in the middle and we are getting detected by artillery, so we do a little bit of a zigzag there. And then we get undetected, stop, finish off that Brumbar, and now we can resume getting shots into the side of these enemies. And instead of going back down the 890 line towards our base, I've decided to come into the centre and get flanking fire from the rear. Because the penetration is so poor on this tank, you would struggle to go through a lot of tanks from the front, and from firing here I'm using the distraction of my teammate to be able to fire at the weakest part of the enemies, and I'm also able to use the bushes here to remain undetected. And already within sort of 5 minutes of this battle, we've picked up a very nice combined damage game here. We're up to 2.6k direct damage and 1424 assistance. We are up by 2 tanks, so it's still relatively close, but I feel like we have them now surrounded. We have 2 tanks near their base, and we should be able to get up behind these vehicles here, create a crossfire, which is what you want to do in a support tank, and we should be able to put our DPM to work here on this ridge line. Hopefully we're able to spot some more tanks hiding at the back here for our team. We've reset the capture circle on this Hellcat there. That Hellcat has no armor, so we can go straight through the front of him, and within very quick succession we get 3 shots and take out that Hellcat. There's an enemy SPG still left, but our teammate should take him out. And this ISU 152, we are able to take a shot from him if we really need to. I'm going to try and be a little bit cheeky, but if we do get penetrated, unless he ammo racks us or sets us on fire, we should be able to survive and then take him out of the game. He fires, misses us, and then we're able to come up and get one more into him. Unfortunately, it only gets absorbed by the tracks due to the poor penetration, but again, another nice indication of what you can do in this tank. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a gameplay in tier 10 matchmaking for a while. I've had some since. You just got to play slightly more cautiously than you do now. Stick with some of your light tank and medium tank allies and support them, and you should be golden in this tank. I like it. I'd recommend it if you like your light tanks and stealthy tanks and you're someone who is a little bit more experienced in the game, but for a newer player I'd say there are definitely more competitive tier 8 premium medium tanks out there. But I hope you've enjoyed today's video on the Kampfpanzer 07RH. Thank you all so much for your support and for your patience while there's been another little gap in between the last video and this video. Just been a little bit busy with some health appointments, but yeah, I'm still playing the game, so hopefully lots more content to come very soon. And until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.